What if someone you loved vanished in the middle of the night and the clock was already working against them? Not metaphorically, not emotionally. Facing the family of Savannah Guthrie right now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. An 84-year-old woman, gone, taken from her own home, with no warning, and with medication so critical that investigators publicly warned her life could be in immediate danger. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't a scripted headline. It's not a dramatic teaser for a true crime documentary. This is unfolding in real time, while most people are just beginning to hear about it. Nancy Guthrie, Savannah's mother, disappeared from her Arizona home under circumstances that have left investigators, reporters, and the public deeply unsettled. Signs of forced entry were found. Evidence points to a nighttime kidnapping. And yet, almost nothing about this case fits the pattern we expect. No ransom demand, no robbery, no clear motive. And that absence, that silence, is what makes this story so chilling. Think about it. When someone is taken against their will, there is usually a reason that reveals itself quickly. Money, revenge, opportunism. Even randomness leaves traces. But here, authorities are saying something rare and deeply unsettling. They don't believe this was about money at all. So if it wasn't robbery, if it wasn't ransom, then why was she taken? That question hangs heavy over every detail of this case. During a press conference, the sheriff made an unusually urgent plea, not to the public, but to whoever had her. He emphasized that Nancy's medication is not optional. Without it, the consequences could be fatal. And more than 24 hours had already passed. That is not language law enforcement uses lightly. When police step outside protocol and speak directly to a potential kidnapper, it tells us something important. They believe time is running out. And yet, despite the urgency, there is an eerie lack of communication from whoever is responsible. No demands, no contact, no explanation, just absence. Now pause and consider the human side of this. Savannah Guthrie is someone millions of Americans see every morning. Calm, polished, in control, a familiar presence delivering the day's headlines with steady composure. But behind the scenes, her family is living a nightmare that no amount of media training prepares you for. Imagine waking up knowing your mother is missing, taken from her home, and every hour that passes makes the situation more dangerous. Imagine having to wait, to hope, to set with uncertainty while the world speculates. And make no mistake, uncertainty is the most brutal part of cases like this, because uncertainty breeds questions. And questions multiply when answers don't come. Why this house? Why this woman? Why now? Investigators have confirmed there were signs of forced entry. That alone rules out so many comforting explanations. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't someone wandering off. This was deliberate. And yet, deliberate does not mean clear. In fact, this case is already marked by contradiction. It was violent enough to involve forced entry, but quiet enough to leave no witnesses. It was serious enough to trigger a public plea from law enforcement, but still vague enough that officials can't explain a motive. And that contradiction is what keeps pulling people back into the story. Because when crimes don't make sense, our brains keep circling them, trying to force order onto chaos. Was Nancy Guthrie targeted, or was she a means to something else? Is the motive personal, or something far more disturbing? Right now, authorities say they simply don't know. And that may be the most frightening part of all. As this story continues to develop, one thing is clear. This is not just about a missing person. It's about time, vulnerability, and a mystery that refuses to follow the rules. Because if investigators are right, and this wasn't about money, then whatever the reason was, hasn't revealed itself yet. And when the motive is missing, the danger often isn't over. It was silence, the kind of silence that only becomes noticeable after it has stretched too long. Hours instead of minutes, a morning that arrives without the expected check-in, a phone that doesn't ring back. That silence is what set everything in motion. According to information confirmed by the Associated Press, investigators were called to Nancy Guthrie's home in Arizona. After concerns escalated, what they found immediately ruled out the most comforting explanations. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not confusion. This was not someone simply leaving on their own. There were signs of forced entry. That single detail changes everything. Forced entry means intent. It means planning. It means someone crossed a line, physically and morally, to get inside that home. And once investigators established that point, the case shifted from a missing person inquiry into something far more serious. Authorities now believe the incident happened at night. Think about what that implies. Nighttime is chosen for a reason. Darkness conceals movement. Fewer witnesses, slower response times, a greater element of control. Whoever did this wasn't improvising in the moment. They were choosing conditions that worked in their favor, and that alone raises a disturbing question. Who planned something like this against an 84-year-old woman? As details slowly emerged, law enforcement officials made another rare move. They stepped in front of cameras and spoke with urgency that felt less procedural and more personal. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos didn't just provide an update, he issued a plea. He stressed that Nancy Guthrie's medication is vital, not helpful. Not optional, vital. He warned that without it, the consequences could become fatal. And more than 24 hours had already passed since she was last known to be safe. That statement wasn't accidental. Law enforcement agencies are trained to be cautious with language. They avoid speculation. They avoid emotional appeals, unless there is a reason. When a sheriff emphasizes medical urgency this directly, it signals something crucial. They believe whoever has her may not fully understand the risk they're creating. Or worse, they understand it completely. Let that sit for a moment. Because here's where the story becomes deeply unsettling. Investigators have said they do not believe this was a robbery. Items weren't taken. The home wasn't ransacked in a way that suggests someone was searching for valuables. There was no obvious financial motive. They also do not believe this was a kidnapping for ransom. No demands have been made. No messages delivered. No phone calls. No notes. Nothing. That absence is not normal. In most abduction cases, communication happens quickly. Even vague demands or indirect contact usually surface. Silence, especially extended silence, is often the most troubling sign investigators can encounter. So ask yourself this. If someone breaks into a home at night, takes an elderly woman against her will, and doesn't ask for money, what exactly were they after? That question is now at the center of the investigation, and it's why officials have been so careful with their words. They are confirming facts without drawing conclusions, because every traditional motive they eliminate only sharpens the mystery. There's another layer here that's impossible to ignore. Nancy Guthrie wasn't living in isolation from the world. She is the mother of a nationally recognized television host. That alone brings scrutiny, attention, and risk assessment. Investigators would naturally examine whether public visibility played any role at all. But so far, there is no indication that this was about publicity either. No message sent to Savannah. No attempt to exploit her platform. No symbolic statement. Again, silence. And silence in cases like this doesn't calm fears. It amplifies them. Because when there's no communication, law enforcement is left guessing not just about motive, but about intent. Is this a situation that could still resolve safely? Or has something already gone terribly wrong? Every hour without answers pushes that question further into dangerous territory. Meanwhile, the family waits, not knowing where she is, not knowing who took her, not knowing why, and perhaps most painfully, not knowing whether she has access to the medication that keeps her alive. This is where timelines stop being abstract and start becoming terrifyingly real. Time without medication isn't measured in days. Sometimes it's measured in hours. That's why investigators made their plea public. That's why they emphasized urgency. And that's why the case has gripped attention so quickly, despite so few details being released. Because what we know already is enough to be deeply alarming. That's one of the first things investigators learn, and one of the first things the public expects. Motive is the thread that turns chaos into a story that makes sense. Money, anger, opportunity, desperation. But this case refuses to give investigators that comfort, because one by one, the usual explanations are being quietly crossed off the list. According to investigators, this does not appear to be a robbery. Items of value were not taken. The home was not stripped or searched in a way that suggests someone was looking for something specific to steal. That alone eliminates one of the most common explanations for forced entry. This also does not appear to be a kidnapping for ransom, and that point cannot be overstated. In cases involving abductions, ransom demands typically come quickly, sometimes within hours, sometimes indirectly, but silence this long is rare. And it's dangerous. So if no one is asking for money, then money wasn't the goal. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable part of the story. If it wasn't about money, then what was it about? Investigators have been careful not to speculate publicly, but what they have ruled out speaks volumes, because every motive they eliminate leaves behind a darker question mark. This wasn't random chaos, it wasn't opportunistic theft, it wasn't an obvious financial crime, and yet it was deliberate enough to involve forced entry and timing chosen under cover of darkness. That contradiction is where this case starts to feel truly unsettling. Consider the vulnerability involved. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. That's not a detail to gloss over. Age changes everything in a case like this. Mobility, health, dependence on routine and medication. Every hour matters more. Every disruption carries greater risk. Who targets someone at that stage of life? And more importantly, why? Some crimes target wealth. Some target access. Some target symbols. But so far, none of those boxes fit neatly here. There's also the emotional contradiction that makes this case even harder to process. Nancy Guthrie is not a public figure herself. She's not someone who lives under a spotlight. And yet, she is closely connected to someone who does. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, is a familiar face to millions of viewers on the Today. Calm, trusted, present in American living rooms every weekday morning. That kind of visibility often brings security awareness, risk assessment, caution, which raises another uncomfortable question. If this wasn't about money, was it personal? Investigators have not confirmed that. There has been no public indication of threats, disputes, or warnings beforehand. No pattern of escalating danger that anyone has acknowledged. And yet, someone crossed the threshold of her home and took her anyway. That lack of context is deeply disturbing. Because personal crimes usually leave emotional fingerprints. Anger, messages, statements. Some form of communication that explains the act, even if only partially. But here again, silence. No explanation. No demands, no attempt to control the narrative, just absence. And silence in investigations like this forces law enforcement into a difficult position. Without communication, they can't negotiate. They can't even determine whether the situation is still actively unfolding or has already reached a tragic conclusion. That uncertainty is why officials have emphasized urgency so strongly, especially regarding medication. Medication dependence changes the timeline entirely. This is not a case where days can pass without consequence. This is a situation where hours matter, and investigators know it. That's why they made their appeal public. That's why they spoke directly to whoever may be responsible. And that's why the lack of response is so alarming. Think about it from another angle. If someone intended harm, silence serves them. If someone intended leverage, silence makes no sense. So where does that leave investigators? In a narrow, uncomfortable space where possibilities grow darker the longer answers don't come. Meanwhile, the emotional toll on the family continues to build. Imagine watching this unfold while maintaining a public-facing role. Imagine delivering news while living inside one. Imagine waiting for a phone call that never comes, knowing that time is not on your side. That tension, between public calm and private terror, is something most people will never experience. But it's very real here, and it's what makes this case resonate beyond headlines. Because this isn't just about a crime. It's about vulnerability, about how quickly safety can be shattered, about how the absence of motive can be more frightening than any explanation at all. As investigators continue to search, they are left piecing together fragments. Entry points, timelines, small details that might explain a decision that currently makes no sense. And yet, the most critical question remains unanswered. Why her? Why that night? And why take someone whose survival depends on medication and then disappear without a word? As the hours stretch on, that silence grows heavier. And with every passing moment, one terrifying possibility becomes harder to ignore. Because when there is no motive, no message, and no demand, investigators must begin to consider outcomes no one wants to face. What if someone you loved vanished in the middle of the night? And time itself became the enemy? Now, after everything we know and everything we still don't, that question feels heavier than ever. Because this case is no longer just about a disappearance. It's about uncertainty. It's about vulnerability. And it's about the unbearable weight of waiting when the clock keeps moving forward whether you're ready or not. Nancy Guthrie did not vanish quietly. She was taken from her home. Investigators found signs of forced entry. Evidence points to a nighttime abduction. These are not details that fade with time. They sharpen. They demand answers. And yet, despite the seriousness of what happened, this case has offered no familiar shape for understanding it. No ransom demand, no robbery, no explanation. Law enforcement officials have publicly ruled out the most common motives, and in doing so, they've left us staring into a far more unsettling void, because crimes without clear motives are the ones that haunt people the longest. They don't resolve neatly, they don't reassure, they linger. The emotional core of this story isn't just the mystery, it's the human cost of not knowing. An 84-year-old woman whose life depends on medication. A family forced to wait in silence. A daughter known for delivering the news, now trapped inside a story no one wants to tell. Savannah Guthrie has spent years sitting behind a desk, calmly guiding viewers through moments of national crisis, tragedy, and uncertainty on the today. But this is different. There's no script here. No closing segment. No answers waiting after the commercial break. Only waiting. And that waiting is made more terrifying by what law enforcement has openly acknowledged. When Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos emphasized that Nancy's medication is vital, that without it the situation could become fatal, it was a moment of raw honesty rarely seen in investigations like this. That wasn't procedural language, that was urgency, that was fear. It was also a plea, not just to the public, but to whoever may be responsible. And the fact that no response has come only deepens the unease, because silence at this stage speaks volumes. It suggests that whoever took her is not negotiating. Not posturing, not seeking leverage, and that reality forces investigators and the public to confront possibilities that are deeply uncomfortable. At the same time, it's important to pause and recognize what this story is not. It is not entertainment, it is not speculation. It is not a puzzle to be solved by rumors. This is a real woman, a real family, and a real investigation unfolding right now. That's why verified reporting matters. That's why investigators have been cautious with their words. And that's why attention, when handled responsibly, can make a difference. Cases like this rely on visibility, on awareness, on the possibility that someone, somewhere, noticed something, a sound, a movement, a detail that didn't seem important at the time. Sometimes, answers don't come from dramatic breakthroughs. They come from quiet memories resurfacing. A light on at an unusual hour, a vehicle parked where it didn't belong, a moment that didn't make sense until later. And that's